Victoria Brooks was 34 when she wired $80,000 to Crestwood Medical Center and didn't tell a soul. She stood alone in the quiet corner of the ICU hallway, phone still warm in her hand, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Through the glass doors, her father, Thomas Brooks, lay motionless beneath machines that beeped with measured patience. A nurse moved around him with practiced calm. The sound of it all felt unreal. Behind her, voices murmured, her mother crying softly, her brother pacing. But Victoria stayed where she was. Still. Focused. When she returned to the waiting room, Susan Brooks looked up at her with red, swollen eyes. "Did you talk to someone?" she asked, hope trembling in her voice. "It's handled," Victoria said. Susan blinked. "Handled how?" "The surgery is cleared. Financially." Evan Brooks stopped pacing. "What do you mean, cleared?" Victoria met his eyes. "I mean Dad's going into surgery." There was a pause. A heavy one. Susan pressed a hand to her chest. "Oh, thank God," she whispered, already crying again. She hugged Evan, clinging to him as if he'd done something heroic. "You always know what to do," she said. Victoria said nothing. She sat down, folded her hands in her lap, and watched the red surgery light turn on. No one asked her how it was handled. No one asked what it cost. And for the moment, that was fine. Her father was alive. Everything else could wait. Before I continue, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from today. Your one click really helps support the channel. 6 hours later, Thomas Brooks survived. The surgeon said the words calmly, like he'd said them 1,000 times before. Susan sobbed into Evan's shoulder. Evan nodded solemnly, already calling relatives to spread the good news. Victoria slipped out before the room filled with gratitude that wasn't meant for her. 3 weeks passed. Thomas recovered quickly, charming nurses, joking about his second chance. On a Tuesday afternoon, Victoria sat in her Dallas office reviewing hospital expansion budgets when her phone buzzed. A Facebook notification. She almost ignored it. Then she saw her father's name. The post showed Evan standing beside Thomas's hospital bed, arms slung proudly over the railing. The caption read, "I wouldn't be here without my son Evan. He handled everything. A real man steps up." Victoria stared at the screen. 247 likes. Dozens of comments praising Evan for his sacrifice. Evan replied to each one with heart emojis and humble thanks. She set the phone down slowly. No anger. No tears. Just a hollow stillness that settled deep in her chest. The recovery party invitation arrived 2 days later. Plano. Saturday. Everyone's coming. Victoria went anyway. The house was full, balloons, laughter, wine glasses clinking. Susan stood beside Thomas, glowing with pride. Evan held court, retelling the story of the scare and how he'd handled things. Then Susan raised her glass. "We're so grateful Evan took charge," she said. Laughter followed. And of course, Victoria helped too, whatever she could manage from that dead-end job of hers. Some guests laughed. Evan smiled behind his hand. Victoria didn't move. She didn't have to. Someone else was about to speak. The doorbell rang just as the laughter faded. Susan turned, still smiling. "That must be Dr. Reed," she said brightly. Thomas's doctor stopped by to check on him. Dr. Samuel Reed stepped inside, calm and unassuming, his eyes scanning the room before landing on Victoria. Recognition flashed instantly. Susan gestured proudly. "Doctor, thank you for coming. This is my son, Evan. He handled everything during the surgery." Dr. Reed paused. "Handled everything?" "Yes," Susan said. "The hospital, the finances, all of it." Dr. Reed looked at Evan, then back at Victoria. His expression tightened, not with anger, but with clarity. "I see," he said carefully. Victoria felt 40 eyes on her. She reached into her purse and clipped her hospital badge to her blouse. The quiet was immediate. "Mrs. Brooks," Dr. Reed said, his voice steady, "Victoria Brooks is the chair of Crestwood Medical Center's board. She personally authorized and processed the full $80,000 payment within 30 minutes of the estimate." Silence crashed over the room. Susan's glass trembled. "Chair, what?" Victoria stepped forward. "I paid for the surgery," she said simply. "Every dollar." Evan's face drained of color. "Victoria, why didn't you say anything?" "I did," she replied. "I said I'd handle it." Thomas stared at her, eyes wide, seeing her for the first time in years.
Dr. Reed nodded once. Your daughter saved your life. The truth had finally arrived. And it wasn't leaving quietly. No one spoke for several seconds.
Then the room erupted, not loudly, but in whispers sharp enough to cut. Susan looked from Victoria to Evan, confusion twisting into something closer to shame.
Is this true? She asked, voice thin.
Victoria held up her phone, the bank confirmation glowing on the screen. January 15th. Crestwood Medical Center. My account.
Evan swallowed. People just assumed it was me, he said weakly. And you let them, Victoria replied. Her voice never rose. That was worse. Thomas reached for her hand. Why didn't I know? He asked.
Because no one asked, she said. Susan's eyes filled with tears. I didn't mean, you did, Victoria interrupted gently. You just didn't think it mattered. The words landed heavier than shouting ever could. Later that night, as Victoria drove back to Dallas, her phone buzzed again. Evan had posted a correction.
A public apology.
The truth, finally written out where everyone could see it.
She didn't comment. She didn't share it. She didn't need to.
For the first time in her life, Victoria Brooks wasn't invisible. And she wasn't interested in shrinking again, not for family, not for comfort, not for silence. The following weeks were quieter, but heavier.
Susan called more often.
Awkwardly at first, then with genuine questions. What does a board chair actually do? She asked one evening, hesitant.
Victoria explained. Susan listened. Really listened.
Evan showed up at a cafe near Crestwood one afternoon, exhausted, stripped of confidence.
I'm shutting down the company, he admitted.
I need to start over.
Victoria nodded.
That's your work to do.
Thomas recovered fully.
One afternoon, he held Victoria's hand and said, I should have seen you sooner.
You see me now, she replied.
That was enough. Victoria didn't cut her family off.
She didn't burn bridges. She simply stopped carrying everyone else's comfort on her back.
Some nights, driving through the Dallas skyline, she thought about that ICU hallway. The wire transfer.
The silence.
She understood now, silence could protect you, but it could also erase you.
She would never let that happen again.
The shift in the Brooks family did not happen overnight. It arrived in fragments, unfinished apologies, uncomfortable pauses, conversations that felt like learning to walk again after years of imbalance.
Susan tried first.
She invited Victoria to Sunday dinner in Plano, then hovered in the kitchen asking questions she'd never asked before. How big is Crestwood, really? She said once, pretending to wipe an already clean counter.
Large enough that mistakes matter, Victoria answered. Susan nodded, absorbing that quietly.
Thomas, on the other hand, was more direct. One afternoon, while they sat on the back porch, he said, I spent years bragging about Evan. I didn't know how much I was missing.
Victoria didn't rush to comfort him.
You missed a lot, she said.
I know, he replied. And I can't fix it.
But I want to do better.
Those words mattered.
Evan struggled the most. The praise he'd lived on vanished almost overnight. Friends stopped calling him the hero.
Investors stopped answering his emails.
When he spoke, people listened differently now, more carefully, less admiring. At a family gathering, a cousin asked Victoria about hospital leadership. The question was casual, curious. Susan watched, silent. When Victoria finished answering, Susan surprised everyone. She worked for that, she said firmly. Every bit of it.
Victoria met her mother's eyes across the room. The moment was small, but it was real.
At Crestwood Medical Center, nothing changed, and everything did. Victoria returned to her role with the same discipline she'd always had, but her boundaries sharpened.
She spoke more plainly in meetings.
She corrected misstatements immediately. She no longer softened her authority to make others comfortable. One afternoon, Dr. Samuel Reed stopped by her office. Your family doing okay? He asked. They are adjusting, Victoria said.
He smiled.
You handled that situation with remarkable restraint.
Restraint isn't weakness, she replied. No, he agreed. It's choice.
At home, Victoria began reclaiming time she'd once spent proving herself. She cooked real dinners,
took walks, let calls go unanswered when she didn't feel like explaining herself. Susan noticed. You don't rush to fix things anymore, she said once.
I fixed what mattered, Victoria answered. The truth was, Victoria had stopped negotiating for space. She occupied it now, quietly, fully. Evan called one evening, voice unsteady.
"I got a job interview," he said. "An actual job."
"That's good," Victoria said.
"I'm scared," he admitted. "So was I," she replied.
"I just didn't have the option not to be."
The line went quiet.
Then Evan said softly, "I see that now."
Spring settled over Dallas with slow warmth.
Crestwood broke ground on its new expansion wing, and Victoria stood among city officials and donors as shovels cut into the soil.
Cameras flashed. Applause followed.
Susan watched from the crowd, pride written plainly on her face, unforced this time. After the ceremony, Susan approached her. "You didn't invite us to this," she said, not accusing, just observing.
"This is my world," Victoria replied.
"I didn't think you'd want to be part of it."
Susan swallowed. "I do now." Victoria studied her mother carefully.
"Then you need to learn how to stand beside me without standing in front of me."
Susan nodded.
"I can do that."
That night, Thomas called from Plano.
"Your mother's been telling everyone about your work," he said, a hint of awe in his voice.
Victoria smiled faintly. "She's allowed."
The difference was simple but profound. The story was no longer being rewritten around her. Evan showed up less often but more honestly. When he did, he listened. When he spoke, he didn't embellish. At dinner one evening, he raised his glass.
"To Victoria," he said.
"For doing the work no one wanted to see."
No one laughed. They didn't need to.
Time did what confrontation alone could not. It reshaped habits.
Susan stopped interrupting.
Thomas stopped assuming. Evan stopped hiding behind charm.
None of it was perfect. Some days were awkward. Some conversations stalled halfway through.
But Victoria no longer carried the responsibility of smoothing things over. One afternoon, Aunt Helen visited Dallas. They sat in a quiet cafe near Crestwood, sunlight pooling across the table. "You changed the rules," Helen said. "I stopped playing by unfair ones," Victoria replied.
Helen smiled.
"That takes courage." Victoria thought of the ICU hallway, the transfer confirmation, the silence she'd once mistaken for strength. "It takes exhaustion," she said.
Helen laughed softly.
"That too." When Victoria returned home that evening, she found a handwritten note in her mailbox.
Susan's handwriting. "I'm learning. I know it's late.
Thank you for not giving up on us, even when you had every reason to." Victoria folded the note carefully and placed it in a drawer.
Not as proof. Not as leverage. Just as a marker of change. She didn't need grand gestures anymore. She needed consistency.
And for the first time, it felt possible.
Victoria drove to Plano one last time before summer fully arrived.
The house felt different, quieter, less performative.
Susan met her at the door without judgment in her eyes.
Thomas smiled without expectation. After dinner, Victoria stood to leave.
Susan hesitated.
"You don't have to come so often," she said.
"I know," Victoria replied.
They stood there for a moment, mother and daughter, not fixed but no longer fractured. Driving back to Dallas, Victoria let the city lights guide her forward. She thought about the cost of silence, the weight of being unseen, and the strange freedom that came with finally refusing it.
She hadn't demanded recognition. She hadn't chased applause.
She had simply told the truth, and stayed standing when it arrived. Summer brought distance, and with it, clarity. Victoria didn't announce it when she began declining some family invitations.
She simply did.
Not out of spite, but out of discernment. She learned which gatherings were about connection and which were about optics.
The difference mattered now. Susan noticed first.
"You've been busy," she said during a phone call that lingered longer than usual.
"Yes," Victoria replied.
"And selective."
There was a pause.
Then Susan said quietly, "That's fair." At Crestwood, Victoria faced a different kind of pressure. The expansion project attracted attention, political, financial, public. A donor challenged her during a closed-door meeting. "You're young for this role," he said, smiling as if it were harmless.
Victoria met his gaze.
"Experience isn't measured in years," she replied. "It's measured in outcomes."
The room went silent.
Then the discussion moved on. That night, Evan texted her a single line. "I stood up to someone at work today."
Didn't hide. Victoria smiled at the screen. Progress didn't always need applause.
When Thomas visited Dallas for a follow-up appointment, He asked to see her office. He walked slowly, still careful with his heart. "This is where you sit?" he asked, almost reverent. "Yes." He nodded. "I should have asked years ago." Victoria placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're asking now." And that, finally, felt like movement forward. The true test came quietly. At a family gathering in late July, a distant relative pulled Susan aside and whispered something with raised brows. Victoria didn't hear the words, but she saw Susan's posture shift, straighten, steady. Susan turned to the group and said, calmly, "Victoria leads the board at Crestwood Medical Center. She saved her father's life. Please speak accurately." No laughter followed. No correction needed. Victoria caught her mother's eye. Susan nodded once, as if to say, "I heard you." Later, Evan joined Victoria on the back porch. "I used to think confidence was pretending," he said. "Turns out it's owning what you actually do." "Yes," Victoria agreed. "I'm still figuring it out," he admitted. "That's allowed," she said. They stood in companionable silence, something new and unfamiliar between them. In Dallas, Victoria's life felt fuller, not louder, but grounded. She reconnected with friends she'd once postponed. She took a weekend trip without explaining herself to anyone. Susan called less often, but when she did, the calls had substance. Thomas sent articles about healthcare policy, scribbling questions in the margins. The family wasn't healed. It was recalibrating. And Victoria understood something essential: change that lasts is rarely dramatic. It's consistent. It's awkward. It's earned one conversation at a time. In August, Crestwood faced a staffing crisis. A flu outbreak stretched resources thin, and tension rippled through every department. During an emergency meeting, voices rose. Blame surfaced. Victoria listened. Then she spoke. "We don't solve pressure by fracturing," she said. "We solve it by prioritizing people." She authorized overtime funds, redirected administrative staff, and approved temporary housing for exhausted nurses. The response was immediate. The system stabilized. Dr. Samuel Reed stopped her afterward. "You lead like someone who knows what it costs to hesitate," he said. Victoria thought of that ICU hallway. "I do." That evening, Susan called, shaken. "One of my friends asked why I used to talk about Evan so much more than you." "And?" Victoria asked. "I told her the truth," Susan said. "That I was wrong." Victoria closed her eyes briefly. "Thank you." The apology wasn't dramatic. It didn't erase the past. But it was real, and that mattered more. Evan sent a photo later that week. A modest desk. A nameplate. His first real job. "I earned this," the caption read. Victoria replied with a single word: good. She didn't need to rescue him. She didn't need to prove herself. Everyone was finally doing their own work. By early fall, the story had settled into something quieter than triumph. Victoria visited Plano less, but when she did, she wasn't bracing herself. The house felt honest now. One evening, Susan hesitated at the kitchen sink. "I spent years thinking success looked like attention," she said. "I didn't realize how loud neglect could be." Victoria leaned against the counter. "Most people don't realize what they are doing until it costs them." Susan nodded, absorbing that without defense. Thomas joined them, placing a hand over Victoria's. "You didn't owe us what you gave," he said. "I gave it because I chose to," Victoria replied. That distinction mattered. Driving back to Dallas that night, Victoria felt no need to replay the past. The anger had burned out, replaced by something steadier. Self-respect. She understood now that being seen wasn't about exposure, it was about alignment. Saying what was true. Standing where she belonged. She had stopped explaining herself. And the world, slowly, had adjusted. Victoria stood at her apartment window one evening, watching the Dallas skyline soften into dusk. Her phone buzzed, messages from colleagues, a brief check-in from Susan, a photo from Evan showing his first paycheck framed as a joke. She smiled. The story of her life hadn't changed because people finally praised her. It changed because she stopped shrinking to fit their expectations. She thought about the cost of that surgery. $80,000. A staggering number. But the real price she'd paid for years was silence. And she was done paying it. Victoria turned off the lights and let the city glow carry her forward, unapologetic, visible, and whole. The first real test of permanence came unexpectedly. In October, A distant cousin hosted a charity fundraiser in Plano, the kind filled with polite smiles and quiet competition.
Victoria almost declined, but Susan asked without pressure.
"You don't have to come," she said. "I just wanted you to know you're welcome."
Victoria went.
The room buzzed with conversation when someone asked, "So, Susan, how are the kids doing?"
Susan didn't hesitate.
"Victoria chairs the board at Crestwood Medical Center," she said evenly. "She's leading their largest expansion."
No embellishment. No comparison. Victoria felt something loosen in her chest.
Later, a woman approached her. "You handled that hospital crisis beautifully," she said. "I read about it."
Victoria thanked her and moved on. She no longer lingered where validation lived.
Evan arrived late, less confident, more grounded. "I almost didn't come," he admitted.
"You came anyway," Victoria said. He nodded.
"That's new for me." They stood side by side for a moment, not rivals, not roles, just siblings learning balance. When Victoria left that night, she realized something quietly profound. The room no longer felt like it could erase her. At Crestwood, autumn brought audits and scrutiny. External reviewers combed through decisions, timelines, expenditures.
Victoria welcomed it.
Transparency didn't threaten her. It confirmed her work. One reviewer asked, "How did you learn to make high-stakes decisions under pressure?"
Victoria answered honestly.
"By doing it when it mattered most."
He nodded, satisfied. That evening, Thomas called.
"Your mother corrected someone today," he said softly. "Didn't look at me for approval.
Just did it." Victoria smiled. "Good." Susan sent a message later. "I'm learning to pause before I speak. It's harder than I thought." Victoria replied, "Awareness usually is." The family dynamic had shifted from performance to intention. No one rushed to fill silence anymore. They let it exist without rewriting it. Victoria understood now that respect didn't require constant presence. It required consistency. And for the first time, she trusted that consistency wouldn't vanish the moment she stepped away. Evan called one night after work, voice tight. "I messed up today," he said. "What happened?" "I took credit for something I didn't do," he admitted. "Old habit." "I corrected it 5 minutes later, but still." Victoria paused. "You noticed it. You fixed it." "That's not nothing." "I hated how easy it felt," he said. "Growth is uncomfortable," she replied. Silence stretched between them, not strained, just real. "I'm glad you didn't cut us off," Evan said quietly. "I didn't stay for you," Victoria answered. "I stayed for myself." After the call, she sat with that truth. Boundaries weren't walls, they were definitions. Outside, Dallas hummed, alive and indifferent. Victoria felt steady. No surge of victory. No lingering resentment. Just clarity. Thanksgiving came without ceremony. No long speeches. No performances. Just food, warmth, and conversations that didn't need translating. Susan asked Victoria about her upcoming board retreat. Evan asked advice about negotiating salary. Thomas listened more than he spoke. After dinner, Susan lingered as Victoria packed her coat. "I used to think love meant pride," she said quietly. "Now I know it means attention." Victoria met her gaze. "It means effort." Susan nodded. "I'm trying." That was enough. Driving back to Dallas, Victoria reflected on how easily people mistook endurance for consent. She had endured for decades. Now, she chose. The difference felt revolutionary. On a cool December evening, Victoria attended Crestwood's year-end review. Numbers were strong. Outcomes better. Lives changed. As applause filled the room, she didn't think about recognition. She thought about alignment, between who she was and how she lived. Later, alone in her car, she replayed the journey not with bitterness, but with understanding. Some lessons required silence. Others demanded voice. She had learned both. And this time, she chose to speak. The invitation arrived just before the holidays, handwritten this time. Susan's script was careful, deliberate. Sunday dinner. Just us. No speeches. Victoria read it twice, then set it down. She didn't feel obligated. That alone told her how far she'd come. She went because she wanted to. Plano was quiet that evening. The house glowed softly, familiar but no longer suffocating. Susan opened the door and smiled. Not the performative smile she used with guests, but a smaller, honest one. Dinner was simple. No audience. No narratives to manage.
At one point, Thomas cleared his throat. "I've been telling people something different lately," he said.
Victoria looked up.
"I say my daughter saved my life," he continued. "And I mean it."
Susan didn't correct him.
Evan didn't joke.
The moment passed without ceremony, which somehow made it stronger.
Later, as Victoria stood to leave, Susan touched her arm.
"Thank you for coming back," she said. Victoria met her eyes.
"Thank you for making it possible."
Neither of them cried.
They didn't need to anymore. On the drive home to Dallas, the city lights stretched ahead like a promise rather than a challenge. Victoria thought about the version of herself who once believed silence was the price of peace. She understood now that peace built on erasure was never peace at all. She had paid $80,000 to save her father's life. But she had reclaimed something far more valuable by telling the truth: her voice, her space, her worth. Her family had changed, not because she demanded it, but because she stopped disappearing. Victoria pulled into her driveway and sat for a moment before going inside. She felt no need to review the past or predict the future.
She was present. Grounded. Seen. Some stories end with applause. Hers ended with alignment.
And that was enough. This story is a reminder that your worth doesn't need permission or applause. If this resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments, like the video, and subscribe for more stories. Until next time, don't let anyone make you invisible.